What happens when your own son turns you into $1 million lie? What happens when your life becomes someone else's PR stunt? If it weren't for us, my mother in law would still be sitting in some moldy studio apartment in Queens, living off food stamps, never seeing sunlight. But now, we bought her a gorgeous $2 million Manhattan penthouse. That's what real family devotion looks like. Money talks, and we gave her a life worth living. The champagne glass in my weathered hands trembled as Samantha's voice echoed through the microphone at the financial gala. Camera flashes exploded like lightning across the ballroom. The crowd of investors erupted in applause, their laughter mixing with the clink of crystal and the rustle of designer gowns. My daughter-in-law stood there on stage, her arm draped possessively around my son Daniel, basking in the spotlight like she just announced the cure for cancer. I sat alone at the back table, the cheap polyester of my thrift store dress suddenly feeling like sandpaper against my skin. The smell of expensive perfume and catered lobster filled the air, but all I could taste was the bitter irony of her words. Around me, New York's financial elite nodded approvingly, some even pulling out their phones to record this heartwarming moment of filial devotion. $2 million, Manhattan penthouse, life worth living. Every single word was a lie. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 67 years old, a widow, and a retired secretary who spent 40 years filing papers and answering phones. And as I sat there listening to my daughter-in-law paint this beautiful fantasy about my life, I was mentally calculating whether I had enough left in my checking account to pay next month's rent on my moldy basement apartment in Queens. The same moldy basement I'd been calling home for the past 3 years. The same basement that floods when it rains. The same basement where I haven't seen real sunlight in months. For years, I'd convinced myself that staying quiet was dignity, that not being a burden was love, that watching my son and his wife use my poverty as their stepping stone to success was somehow noble. I told myself that Daniel had worked hard to become a CEO, that Samantha was just ambitious, that being their dirty little secret was better than being their public embarrassment. But sitting there in that glittering ballroom, watching hundreds of strangers applaud my son's fictional generosity while I counted quarters for the subway ride back to my cave, something inside me finally snapped. Not broken, snapped into focus. Because here's what Samantha didn't know as she soaked up that applause. I had documentation, lease agreements, bank statements, recorded conversations. And most importantly, I had finally run out of reasons to protect people who were willing to build their empire on the foundation of my humiliation. This isn't a story about a grateful mother who stayed quiet while her children climbed to success. This isn't a story about family loyalty or keeping peace at any cost. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth, even when, especially when, the truth will destroy everything your family has built on lies. Because when your own blood turns your suffering into their success story, it's time to rewrite the ending. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how I got to that basement starts with understanding the dreams I once had. 43 years ago, I married Robert Harper in a small church in Brooklyn. We were young, broke, and stupid in love. Robert worked construction. I was a secretary at a law firm. And we scraped together every penny to buy a tiny house in Queens. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where you couldn't open the oven and the refrigerator at the same time. But It was ours. When Daniel was born, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. He was this perfect chubby baby with Robert's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. I remember standing in his nursery at 3 a.m., watching him sleep, promising him the world. I was going to be the mother who showed up to every school play, who packed elaborate lunches, who never missed a baseball game. And I was. Robert died when Daniel was 16. Massive heart attack at 39, gone before the ambulance even arrived. One day, we were planning Daniel's graduation party. The next, I was picking out caskets and trying to figure out how to pay for college on a secretary's salary. Those were the years that defined me. Working double shifts, picking up weekend cleaning jobs, selling everything we owned except Daniel's baseball trophies and my wedding ring. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so Daniel could have proper meals. I wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years so he could have new clothes for school. When his friends went to Florida for spring break, I worked overtime for months to send him too, then told him the money came from his father's life insurance. Every sacrifice felt sacred. Every sleepless night felt purposeful. I wasn't just surviving. I was investing in my son's future, in the family legacy, in the promise that someday all this struggle would mean something beautiful. Daniel graduated valedictorian from NYU Business School. I sat in that auditorium in my carefully mended dress, tears streaming down my face, watching my son shake hands with the dean. This was it, the moment when everything I'd given up would be worth it. He got his first job at an investment firm, then another, climbing higher with each move. He met Samantha at a company mixer. She was everything I wasn't: educated, polished, from a family with connections and trust funds. She wore designer clothes like they were uniforms and spoke about networking and brand building like they were religious practices. I liked her at first. She was ambitious for Daniel, pushed him to take bigger risks, bigger jobs. When they got married, I gave them Robert's grandmother's ring, the only thing of value I had left. Samantha had it reset into something more contemporary the next week. The changes started small. Family dinners became less frequent. Phone calls got shorter. When I lost my job during the recession, Daniel found me the basement apartment in Queens. Just temporarily, Mom, until you get back on your feet. But at 65, nobody wanted to hire an aging secretary with outdated computer skills. Years passed. The basement became permanent. My health got worse: arthritis, high blood pressure, the kind of ailments that come from decades of working too hard and sleeping too little. But I never complained. I never asked for help. I had raised my son to be successful, and successful people didn't need to worry about their mother's problems. Looking back now, I realize that somewhere along the way, I stopped being Daniel's mother and became his burden. Somewhere along the way, my love became their inconvenience. And somewhere along the way, they decided that the truth about me was something to be ashamed of, rather than honored. But the truth has a way of demanding its day in court. The first crack in my carefully maintained denial came on a Tuesday in October, 3 months before that devastating gala. I was walking past Daniel's office building in Midtown, coming back from a doctor's appointment that I'd paid for with coins I'd been saving in a coffee can. My arthritis had been acting up, and the clinic doctor wanted me to see a specialist, something about possible nerve damage from years of repetitive motion. The appointment would cost $300 I didn't have, but I figured I'd worry about that later. As I passed the gleaming glass tower where my son worked, I saw them. Daniel and Samantha standing on the sidewalk with a group of people in expensive suits. Business lunch, probably. I started to wave, maybe even ask if they had time for coffee, when I heard Samantha's voice cutting through the city noise. Oh, the mother in law situation? We've got it completely handled. Daniel's mother is living her best life in this gorgeous Manhattan apartment we set up for her. $2 million. Can you believe it? But that's what success looks like, taking care of family in style. The man she was talking to nodded approvingly. That's the kind of family values our investors want to see. Real commitment to elderly care. I froze on the sidewalk, invisible in my worn coat among the stream of well-dressed professionals. Manhattan apartment? $2 million? I touched the subway card in my pocket, the one I'd have to reload with my last $20 to get home to Queens. Daniel saw me before I could slip away. For just a moment, his face went pale. Then he smiled, the same smile he'd worn as a child, when caught in a lie. Mom, what are you doing here? The business associates turned to look at me, and I saw Samantha's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She recovered quickly, her PR training kicking in. Mrs. Harper, don't you look lovely today? Her voice was honey over broken glass. How's the new apartment treating you? I stared at her, then at my son, understanding flooding through me like ice water. They were expecting me to play along, to nod and smile, and become complicit in their lie. The apartment is... I started, then stopped. The words wouldn't come. How could I expose them right there on the street? How could I humiliate my own son in front of his colleagues? Mom's a little overwhelmed by all the luxury. Daniel jumped in smoothly. You know how it is with older folks. Takes time to adjust to the good life. Laughter rippled through the group. Kind, condescending laughter. The kind reserved for amusing elderly relatives and their charming quirks. I managed a weak smile and escaped, my hand shaking as I descended into the subway. During the 45-minute ride back to Queens, I replayed the scene over and over. $2 million, Manhattan apartment, living her best life. That night, I called Daniel from my basement, water dripping from the ceiling into a bucket by my bed. Honey, I ran into you today and I heard Samantha mention something about an apartment. There was a pause. Then, oh, that. Yeah, Mom, it's complicated. Business stuff. You wouldn't understand. But she said, Mom, please. I've had a long day. Samantha handles the PR side of things. Sometimes she has to simplify the story for outsiders. You know how it is. Simplify the story. I was the story that needed simplifying. After that, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how they never invited me to company functions. How Samantha coached her daughter to say, Grandma lives in a fancy building. When people asked, how Daniel's business cards listed him as dedicated to family values, while his actual family lived in a basement. I started documenting things, not out of malice, but out of confusion. I kept receipts from my rent payments, copies of Daniel's company newsletters that featured photos of him talking about family success stories, screenshots of Samantha's social media posts about generational wealth and taking care of loved ones. The pieces formed a picture I didn't want to see. I wasn't Daniel's mother anymore. I was his marketing material. My poverty wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a narrative to be rewritten. My real life wasn't good enough for their success story, so they'd simply invented a better one. But the cruelest part wasn't the lies they told strangers. It was how they trained me to collaborate in my own erasure. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I smiled and nodded, every time I failed to correct their fiction, I became an accomplice in the murder of my own truth. 3 months later, sitting in that ballroom listening to Samantha spin her fairy tale, I finally understood what my son and his wife had really bought with their success: the right to rewrite reality itself. And I realized that if they could afford to buy a new version of my life, I could afford to sell them the truth. The humiliation started small, like paper cuts that you don't notice until you're bleeding all over everything. 2 weeks after the sidewalk encounter, Samantha called me with a favor. "Mother Harper," she said in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. "We're having a little gathering for Daniel's potential investors next week. Nothing fancy, just drinks and networking. We'd love for you to stop by, but..." She paused dramatically. "Well, I picked up this lovely outfit for you. Something more appropriate for the occasion." The lovely outfit was a polyester pantsuit from JCPenney with the tag still on. Navy blue, size too large, the kind of thing designed to make elderly women disappear into the background. There was a note attached: "Something dignified for Mom. Love, S." I stared at that note for 20 minutes. Dignified. As if everything I owned was somehow shameful. At the party, I was introduced as Daniel's mother to exactly 3 people, then, essentially, forgotten. I spent most of the evening in the corner, watching Samantha work the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of connections and influence. When someone asked about family, she'd gesture vaguely in my direction and mention Daniel's wonderful mother, before quickly changing the subject. The worst part came when I offered to help serve appetizers, something I'd done at every family gathering for 40 years. Samantha's smile turned sharp as a scalpel. "Oh no, Mother Harper, you're a guest tonight. Just enjoy yourself. Maybe find a quiet spot to rest. A quiet spot to rest. Code 4. Please make yourself invisible." The incidents multiplied like cancer cells. At Thanksgiving, I brought my famous apple pie, the same recipe I'd made for Daniel since he was 5. Samantha took one look and whisked it away to the kitchen, returning with a pie from some fancy bakery. "The presentation is just more cohesive this way," she explained to the other guests. "We want everything to look perfect for the photos." Photos. Everything was about photos now. Samantha documented their life like a war correspondent, posting carefully curated images of their success. And I was the element that didn't fit the aesthetic. When my grandson Tommy asked why I looked sad in the Christmas pictures, Samantha knelt down to his eye level and said, "Grandma's just tired, sweetheart. Being old is very exhausting. Being old is very exhausting." As if my age were a personal failing, a character flaw that inconvenienced everyone around me. The financial manipulation started in January. Daniel called during a snowstorm, his voice urgent. "Mom, I need you to do me a favor. Can you write a check for $5,000 to Samantha's brother? It's for a business investment, but it needs to come from a clean source for tax reasons. I'll pay you back next month, I promise." $5,000 was most of what I had left from Robert's life insurance. But Daniel sounded desperate, and after all those years of him supporting my rent, how could I refuse? I wrote the check. Next month came and went. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about repayment, Daniel looked genuinely confused. What 5,000? Oh, that was for your care, Mom. Consider it your contribution to the family. You're living practically rent-free compared to Manhattan prices. My contribution to the family. As if living in squalor was somehow a privilege I should be grateful for. The lies became bolder, more elaborate. At a charity function, I watched Samantha give a speech about our family's commitment to elderly care while describing the fictional Manhattan penthouse in loving detail. She mentioned the marble countertops, the panoramic city views, the live-in aide they'd supposedly hired for me. Live-in aide? I laughed bitterly, thinking about the rats I'd been trying to poison in my basement walls. The final straw came in March when I got sick with bronchitis that wouldn't go away. The basement's dampness was making it worse, and I ended up in the emergency room when I couldn't stop coughing up blood. They kept me overnight for observation. I called Daniel from the hospital. I'm sorry to bother you, honey, but I'm at Mount Sinai. They want to keep me for tests, and I don't have anyone to. Mom, this is really bad timing. Samantha's hosting a dinner for the board tonight. Can't you just take a cab home or something? Take a cab home from the hospital with bronchitis to a moldy basement. That night, lying in the hospital bed with pneumonia settling into my lungs, I watched through the window as snow fell on the city lights. Somewhere out there, my son was hosting a dinner party, probably telling stories about his generous care for his elderly mother. And here I was, alone, counting the hours until I'd be discharged back to the basement that was slowly killing me. I realized then that I wasn't just being used. I was being erased. My real life, my real struggles, my real humanity had become inconvenient truths to be managed and rewritten. But inconvenient truths have a way of demanding attention. And I was about to become very, very demanding. The breaking point came on that glittering Tuesday night in April at the Manhattan Financial Excellence Gala. I almost didn't go. The invitation had arrived 3 days late, clearly an afterthought, with a handwritten note from Samantha. Dress nicely. This is important for Daniel's career. I spent my last $40 on a dress from the Salvation Army, navy blue with tiny pearl buttons. It was the kind of dress that had probably been beautiful once, on someone else, in a different decade. But it was clean and it fit. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I could blend into the background of my son's success one more time. I should have known better. The Roosevelt Hotel ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across tables draped in white silk. The city's financial elite mingled over champagne that cost more per bottle than my monthly rent. I felt like an imposter in my thrift store dress, clutching a small purse that contained my subway card and exactly $12 in emergency cash. They seated me at table 18 in the back corner, with the plus ones and lesser spouses. I didn't mind. I was used to being invisible at these things. I watched Daniel work the room, confident and polished in his $1,000 suit, and felt a familiar mixture of pride and loneliness. Then Samantha took the stage. She looked radiant under the spotlights, her red dress catching the light like liquid fire. The microphone picked up every word as she launched into her speech about successful families and generational wealth. I sat there, invisible and forgotten, as she painted a picture of family values and social responsibility. You know, she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you do for the people you love. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Someone at my table whispered, "She's so articulate." Take my mother in law, for example, Samantha continued, and my blood turned to ice. When Daniel and I started building our wealth, the first thing we did was rescue her from poverty. She was living in this terrible little apartment in Queens, barely scraping by on Social Security, using food stamps, never seeing daylight. The crowd made sympathetic noises. Poor elderly woman. How tragic. How fortunate she had such caring children. But we couldn't stand to see her suffer like that. So we bought her a beautiful $2 million penthouse in Manhattan. Marble counters, panoramic views, a full-time caregiver. Because that's what family does. We lift each other up. The applause was thunderous. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning. Several people at my table turned to look around, probably wondering where this lucky mother-in-law was sitting. "She's probably too modest to stand up," Samantha laughed into the microphone. "But she's here tonight, living proof that the American dream works when families stick together." More applause. Louder now. Someone started a standing ovation. I sat there, frozen, as the lies washed over me like acid rain. $2 million, Manhattan penthouse, full-time caregiver, American dream. In my mind, I could see my basement apartment, the bucket catching drips from the ceiling, the space heater I couldn't afford to run, the mold growing in the corner that made me cough every night, the food stamps in my wallet that I'd hidden from Daniel for 3 years because I was too ashamed to admit I needed them. Around me, New York's financial elite applauded my fictional rescue, while I calculated whether I had enough money for the subway ride home. Something inside me cracked, not broke, crystallized, like water turning to ice, expanding and becoming harder, stronger, more dangerous. I stood up. The movement was small, insignificant in a room of 400 people, but it felt like standing up to the entire universe. My legs shook as I walked toward the stage, my cheap shoes silent on the thick carpet. Samantha saw me coming. For just a moment, her perfect composure flickered. I saw confusion, then recognition, then something very close to panic flash across her face. But she was a professional. She recovered quickly, gesturing toward me with her practiced smile. And here she is now, our wonderful mother, coming to say hello. The spotlight found me, harsh and revealing. I blinked in the glare, seeing the crowd's expectant faces. They were waiting for me to play my part, to smile and wave and validate their beautiful story about family love and generational wealth. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, my lease agreement for the basement apartment. Rent, $650 per month. Address, 4723 Queens Boulevard, basement apartment B. $2 million? I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. The microphone picked up my words, carried them to every corner of the silent ballroom. The penthouse? The caregiver? I held up the lease agreement, my hand steady now, my voice growing stronger. I live in a basement. $650 a month. In Queens. There is no penthouse. There is no caregiver. There are only lies. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning humming. The silence stretched across the ballroom like a held breath. 400 of New York's financial elite stared at me, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Their conversations died in their throats. Camera flashes had stopped. Even the waitstaff had paused in their service, silver trays balanced in their hands like they were carrying evidence. Samantha stood at the podium, her red dress now looking like a warning flag. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. I. That is. Mother Harper, you seem confused. I'm not confused, I said, and my voice carried clearly in the terrible quiet. I'm poor. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone, the ancient flip phone Daniel had given me 3 Christmases ago when my old one finally died. With fingers that barely shook, I found the voice recording I'd made 2 weeks earlier when I'd hidden in their coat closet during another one of their investor dinners. Daniel's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system, crystal clear and damning. The old lady is perfect PR. Investors eat up the family values angle. Mom doesn't need to know what we're telling people. She'd probably just complicate things with the truth. Samantha's voice followed. Exactly. She's like our little secret weapon. Nobody needs to know she's living in that basement. The fiction is so much more inspiring than reality. Their laughter on the recording cut through the ballroom like broken glass. Now the silence was different. Electric, dangerous. I could see phones being pulled out, recording everything. Social media influencers and financial journalists suddenly very alert in their seats. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a scandal unfolding in real time. Mrs. Harper, said a voice from the crowd. A woman in her 50s, expensively dressed, was standing at one of the front tables. Are you saying that your son and daughter-in-law have been lying about your living situation to investors and business partners? I looked at Daniel. My son, the baby I'd held at 3 a.m. when he had ear infections. The little boy who'd made me Mother's Day cards from construction paper and glue. The teenager I'd worked 3 jobs to send to college. He was staring at me with something I'd never seen before. Not embarrassment, not guilt. Rage. Pure, cold rage that I had dared to ruin his perfect evening. Answer the question, Mom, he said quietly, but the microphone picked it up anyway. Tell them the truth. The truth. After years of lies, years of complicity, years of being an accessory to my own erasure, he was asking me to tell the truth. The truth, I said, and I felt something unlock inside my chest, something that had been caged for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Is that I live in a basement apartment that floods when it rains. The truth is that I haven't seen my grandson in 6 months because I'm not photogenic enough for their social media. The truth is that they've stolen $5,000 from me for a business investment that never existed. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a small stack of papers. Bank statements, medical bills, rent receipts, the documentation of a real life, not a marketing campaign. The truth is that while they were telling you about marble countertops and city views, I was choosing between prescription medications and groceries. The truth is that I'm not their beloved family matriarch. I'm their dirty secret that they've rebranded as their greatest achievement. Someone in the crowd gasped. Phones were recording openly now. I could see the headline writing itself. CEO's Mother Exposes Family's Lies at Charity Gala. Daniel stepped toward me, his face dark with fury. Mom, you need to stop this right now. You're having some kind of episode. You're confused. I'm not confused, Daniel. I looked directly at him, my son, my greatest achievement, and my greatest disappointment. I'm finally awake. I turned back to the crowd, to the cameras, to the truth that was spreading through the room like wildfire. My name's Evelyn Harper. I'm 67 years old. I live at 4723 Queens Boulevard, basement apartment B, and I'm done being invisible. I set the microphone down on the podium with a gentle click that somehow sounded like thunder. And then I walked out of their perfect lies and into my imperfect truth. I didn't go home that night. For the first time in 3 years, I couldn't face that basement, couldn't breathe that moldy air, couldn't pretend that hiding in the shadows was dignity. Instead, I walked. I walked through Manhattan in my thrift store dress and sensible shoes, past restaurants where the cost of one meal could feed me for a month, past apartment buildings where the doormen wore better clothes than I owned. The city hummed around me with late-night energy, taxis honking, people laughing as they spilled out of bars, the distant rumble of subway trains carrying night workers to their shifts. I felt electric, dangerous, free. By morning, I was sitting in a 24-hour diner in Hell's Kitchen, nursing my third cup of coffee and watching my phone buzz with notifications I didn't know how to open. The story was spreading. Videos of my speech were going viral. Number sign. Basement Truth was trending on Twitter. The first reporter found me there at 7 a.m. Mrs. Harper, I'm Jessica Chen from the New York Times. Could we talk? 3 hours later, I was sitting in her office, telling my story to a woman who listened like every word mattered. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't try to soften the edges of my truth. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. This is going to be front page, Mrs. Harper. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Daniel's face when he'd realized I wasn't going to back down. I thought about Samantha's perfectly crafted lie, crumbling in real time. I thought about 3 years of biting my tongue while they turned my poverty into their publicity. I'm ready, I said. The article ran the next morning with the headline, "The Basement Truth: How a CEO Built His Reputation on His Mother's Hidden Poverty." The photograph showed me holding my lease agreement, standing in front of the Roosevelt Hotel where my old life had ended. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Reporters, talk show producers, documentary filmmakers, lawyers offering to work pro bono, organizations for elderly rights wanting me to speak at their events. But the call that mattered came at noon. "Mrs. Harper? This is Margaret Williams from the Elder Justice Coalition. We've been following your story, and we'd like to help. We have emergency housing assistance, legal aid, and advocacy services. Most importantly, we believe you." By that afternoon, I was sitting in a clean, bright office with Margaret and a team of lawyers who explained my rights in language I could understand. They helped me file reports about the financial exploitation. They connected me with a caseworker who found me temporary housing in a senior community residence, while we sorted out my long-term options. The room they gave me was small, but it had a window. Real sunlight streamed across a clean floor. There was no mold, no leaking ceiling, no sound of rats in the walls. I sat on the narrow bed that first night and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse. Daniel called the next day. I almost didn't answer. "Mom, you've destroyed everything. My company is dropping me. Samantha's talking about divorce. Our investors are pulling out. Are you happy now?" I looked out my clean window at trees I could actually see, at sky that wasn't just a sliver between buildings. "I'm not happy that you're hurting, Daniel. But I'm not responsible for the consequences of your choices anymore. My choices? You humiliated us in front of 400 people. No, honey, I just refuse to be humiliated anymore. The line went quiet for a long moment. I gave you a place to live, he said, finally. You gave me a place to hide, I corrected. There's a difference. The media attention brought unexpected gifts. Donations poured in from strangers who'd seen my story. Not pity money, but funds for a legal defense and a fresh start. Letters arrived from other elderly people who'd been financially exploited by their own families. A publisher called about a book deal. Most surprisingly, my grandson Tommy showed up at my new residence on a Saturday morning, alone. Grandma, Mom said you were sick, but you look fine to me. I knelt down to his eye level. This boy who barely knew me because I'd been hidden away like a shameful secret. I wasn't sick, sweetheart. I was just very, very tired of being invisible. He nodded solemnly, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I drew you a picture of your new house. Mom said it was ugly, but I think it looks happy. It was a crayon drawing of a small building with oversized windows and flowers growing outside. In the corner, he'd written, Grandma's Happy House, in uneven letters. For the first time in years, I felt like someone's grandmother instead of someone's burden. I was finally living in the light. 6 months after the gala, I was sitting in my new apartment, my real apartment, not a fantasy penthouse or a moldy basement, reading the morning newspaper and drinking coffee that I'd bought without counting quarters. The place wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually opened, and I could hear birds singing in the small garden courtyard below. The apartment was part of a subsidized senior living community in Astoria, Queens, not far from where I'd grown up, close enough to the city, but affordable on my Social Security. I had a kitchen where both the oven and refrigerator could be open at the same time, a bathroom with a shower that had proper water pressure, and a bedroom where I slept without the sound of dripping water or scurrying rats. But the real change wasn't in my address. It was in me. I'd become accidentally famous. Not celebrity famous, but inspiration famous. The kind of recognition that came with speaking invitations and interview requests from magazines about aging with dignity. The Elder Justice Coalition had hired me as a community advocate, traveling to senior centers and community groups to talk about financial exploitation and family abuse. The hardest part, I would tell audiences, isn't the poverty or the poor living conditions. It's believing that you deserve them. It's accepting that being invisible is the same as being loved. My story had opened doors I never expected. A documentary crew followed me for 3 weeks, creating a film called Invisible No More that would air on PBS. A publisher had offered me a book deal. Not a ghost-written celebrity memoir, but a real book about financial elder abuse and family dynamics. The speaking engagements paid better than my old secretary job ever had. For the first time in my adult life, I was financially stable without depending on anyone else. I could buy groceries without calculating every purchase. I could take a taxi when it rained instead of waiting 40 minutes for a bus. More importantly, I'd found my voice. The woman who had spent decades making herself smaller, quieter, more convenient, was now standing on stages and speaking truth to audiences who listened like my words mattered. I'd also found unexpected friendships. My neighbor Rose, a retired nurse who'd lost her life savings to a son's gambling addiction. Margaret, from the Elder Justice Coalition, who'd become both mentor and friend. Dr. Patricia Kim, a geriatrician who'd started a support group for families dealing with financial exploitation. We met every Tuesday for coffee at a cafe near my apartment, not to complain or wallow, but to strategize and support each other. Rose was learning computer skills to manage her finances independently. Margaret was training other advocates. Dr. Kim was developing new protocols for identifying financial abuse in medical settings. You know what I realized? Rose said one Tuesday morning, stirring sugar into her coffee. We spent so many years thinking that being a good mother meant disappearing. That love meant sacrifice until there was nothing left of us. And our children learned to see our disappearing as normal, I added. They didn't know they were abusing us because we taught them that we were expendable. The hardest part of my new life was the ongoing estrangement from Daniel. He'd lost his CEO position, just as he'd predicted. The company's board had determined that his character misrepresentation made him unsuitable for leadership. Samantha had indeed filed for divorce, taking their daughter and moving back to her parents' house in Connecticut. He'd called twice since that first angry conversation. Once to tell me he was broke and ask for money, a request so absurd I actually laughed. Once to suggest family counseling, an offer that felt 3 years too late. I don't understand why you can't just forgive and move on, he'd said during that last call. Family is supposed to stick together. Family is supposed to love each other, Daniel. What you and Samantha did wasn't love, it was consumption. Tommy visited me every other Saturday now, often bringing drawings or school projects to show me. Samantha had initially tried to prevent the visits, but my lawyers had helped establish grandparent visitation rights. Watching him color at my kitchen table, seeing him comfortable in my space, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. I was 77 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was living my own life instead of being a supporting character in someone else's story. 1 year after the gala, I stood in the same Roosevelt Hotel ballroom, but this time, I was the keynote speaker for the national conference on elder financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same stage where I'd been transformed into a fictional character was now the platform where I spoke truth to power. The audience was different this time. Social workers, lawyers, policymakers, advocates, and families who'd survived financial exploitation. People who understood that elder abuse wasn't a family matter to be handled privately, but a social justice issue requiring systemic change. When I walked onto this stage a year ago, I began, looking out at the audience of 300. I was invisible, not because I was old or poor or unimportant, but because I had been trained to believe that my value came from my usefulness to others. I had spent so many years making myself smaller that I had almost disappeared entirely. I paused, looking at the spot where Daniel and Samantha had stood, where they'd built their empire of lies on the foundation of my hidden suffering. But invisibility isn't humility. Silence isn't dignity. And accepting abuse isn't love. It's survival. The audience was completely quiet, the kind of attention that felt like prayer. My son didn't wake up one day and decide to exploit me. It happened gradually, enabled by my own belief that being a good mother meant erasing myself. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I smiled through disrespect, every time I prioritized their comfort over my own dignity, I taught them that my needs didn't matter. I'd learned so much in the past year. not just about elder abuse and legal rights, but about myself. Therapy with Dr. Kim had helped me understand the difference between love and codependency, between support and enablement, between being helpful and being used. I've been asked many times if I regret speaking up that night, if I wish I'd found a quieter way to address the situation, if I'm sad about losing my relationship with my son. The question came up in every interview, every speaking engagement. People wanted a neat resolution, a happy ending where families reconciled and everyone learned valuable lessons. The truth is complicated. I'm sad that my son chose lies over love. I'm sad that my daughter in law saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I'm sad that my grandson had to witness the destruction of his family. I looked down at the small silver bracelet on my wrist, a gift from Tommy on my 68th birthday. He'd bought it with his allowance money, choosing it himself from a jewelry store in the mall. But I'm not sad that I chose truth over comfort. I'm not sad that I chose dignity over peace. And I'm not sad that I finally learned to love myself enough to demand better. The changes in my life had rippled outward in ways I never expected. The documentary about my story had sparked legislative hearings on elder financial abuse. 3 states had passed new laws requiring financial institutions to flag suspicious transactions involving elderly customers. The Elder Justice Coalition had received increased funding to expand their advocacy programs. Most importantly, hundreds of other elderly people had come forward with their own stories of family exploitation. Support groups had formed in 12 cities. A national hotline had been established. Resources were being developed in multiple languages. I thought success meant raising a child who didn't need me anymore, I continued. I thought love meant sacrificing everything until there was nothing left. I thought aging meant becoming smaller, quieter, more grateful for any attention at all. I smiled at the audience, thinking about my life now, the morning routine of coffee and newspaper reading without anxiety. The afternoon walks in the park near my apartment, the Tuesday coffee meetings with my advocacy group, the speaking engagements that made me feel useful in a different way. But real love, the kind worth having, requires respect. Real family values honor truth over image. And real success is measured not by what you can take from others, but by what you can give while still maintaining your own dignity. I closed my speech with the words that had become my personal motto. It's never too late to stop being invisible. It's never too late to choose yourself. And it's never too late to discover that your voice matters. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but for the first time in my life, the applause felt like recognition rather than performance. I was finally, truly visible. As I stand here today, looking back on this journey from basement to ballroom, from silence to speaking truth, I want to leave you with this. Your story matters, and your dignity is not negotiable. If you're watching this and seeing pieces of your own life reflected back, if you're the mother living on scraps while your children prosper, if you're the father whose achievements have been erased by ungrateful offspring, if you're the grandparent who's been transformed into a burden instead of a blessing, please know that you are not alone. Financial elder abuse affects millions of families. It happens in mansions and mobile homes, in families with money and families without. It happens because we've been taught that love means disappearing, that respect is optional, and that family has the right to consume us without consequence. But it doesn't have to be your story. You have options. You have rights. You have value that exists independent of what you can provide to others. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and your dignity matters. If my story has shown you anything, let it be this. It's never too late to choose yourself. Document everything. Reach out for help. Contact the Elder Justice Coalition. Call your local area agency on aging. Speak to a financial counselor who specializes in elder protection. There are people trained to help, laws designed to protect you, and communities ready to support you. Don't let anyone convince you that staying silent is noble. Don't let anyone tell you that speaking up is selfish. Don't let anyone make you believe that your suffering is the price of their success. Real family builds bigger tables, not smaller versions of ourselves. Share this story if it resonated with you. Leave a comment about your own experience. Subscribe to stay connected with our community of people who refuse to be invisible. Most importantly, remember, you matter. Your story matters. And you deserve to be seen, heard, and valued for exactly who you are. The truth will set you free, but first, you have to be brave enough to speak it. Love without respect isn't love, and you deserve both.